He just wanted to help a freezing stranger at a bus stop, and had no idea that one simple act would change his life forever. What happened next is truly unbelievable. Watch this video until the end. This story will touch your heart. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The wind sliced through New York City like a razor, carrying the flurries of snow that fell steadily from the heavy gray sky. Sidewalks disappeared under a growing white blanket, muffling the familiar roar of the city. Under a flickering street lamp at a nearly deserted bus stop, Henry Miles hunched into his tattered olive green jacket, clutching a worn manila folder tightly against his chest. Inside were 5 resumes, 5 silent rejections. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath bloom into mist in the freezing night air. 46 years old, once a construction engineer, a widower, a father, and now homeless. The thought sat heavy on his chest, much like the snow gathering at his worn boots. The red glow of a nearby pharmacy sign blinked 8:41 p.m. The bus was late. The cold had long seeped through his thin boots and was now gnawing at his bones. From the swirling snow, a woman emerged. She looked to be in her mid-30s, dressed in a business skirt and blouse, no coat. Her heels clicked against the frozen sidewalk, her wet hair plastered against her face. Her arms hugged her body in a futile attempt to keep warm. She stopped under the same shelter as Henry, shivering violently. Henry tried not to stare, but her presence was impossible to ignore. Clean, well-groomed, yet utterly miserable. She rubbed her bare arms, teeth chattering. He turned away. Just another night. Just another bus to nowhere. But then the wind howled, and she flinched, shrinking into herself. Henry looked back at her. His jacket was barely enough for himself, but it was something. He could have stayed silent, could have kept it for himself, but he didn't. Without a word, he slipped off his jacket, the cold biting instantly at his skin, and stepped toward her. Startled, she said, "You don't have to do that." Henry gave a tired smile. "I've lost enough today. Giving's all I have left." She hesitated, glancing at the thin fabric of his shirt beneath. "But you need it more than me." Still, he gently placed the jacket around her shoulders. Not today, he thought. Warmth surprised her. The jacket smelled faintly of soap, maybe coffee, and something like home. She instinctively pulled it tighter around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, crossing his arms to conserve what little warmth he had left. They stood there silently as the snow fell in thick, lazy spirals. After a moment, she turned to him. "What's your name?" "Henry," he replied. "And you?" "Claire." "Nice to meet you, Henry." She looked at him again. "You really shouldn't have given me your jacket." He smiled weakly. "Probably not, but I couldn't just let you freeze." The low rumble of a bus finally broke the heavy silence. Its headlights cut through the falling snow as it pulled up to the curb. Claire moved toward it, then paused, glancing back at him. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. Henry shrugged. "Somewhere." He didn't explain that somewhere was the back seat of a rusted-out pickup truck parked behind an abandoned warehouse. She dug into her handbag, pulled out a small card, and handed it to him. "In case you ever need anything." He accepted it without looking, sliding it into the battered folder with his resumes. People often said things like that. They rarely meant them. Claire stepped onto the bus, pulling the jacket tighter around her. She looked back once more before the doors closed behind her. Henry stood there, the snow settling on his hair and shoulders, trembling not from the cold, but from something else. Something small, quiet, powerful. He looked up at the sky, then down the empty street. Maybe tomorrow, he whispered. Turning, he trudged into the night. The side streets were quieter, darker, the snow crunching under his worn boots. There was no rush, no one waiting, no lights shining for him, only the cold, familiar outline of his truck. He reached it just after 9 p.m. The old 1998 Chevrolet sat sunken in the snow. The heater hadn't worked in years. Inside, the front seat was a nest of old blankets and a battered pillow tucked into the corner. A lunchbox sat under the dashboard. Henry climbed in, closed the door, and sat in silence. From the glove compartment, he pulled out a small tin box. Inside, faded with time and fingerprints, was a photo. His wife, Lillian, beaming brightly, and their son, Noah, about 7 years old, grinning with a crooked smile. "Good night, Lil," Henry murmured. "Good night, Noah." He leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, letting memories rush over him. Once, he had been Henry Miles, a man who built schools, homes, hospitals. He had a wife who taught kindergarten, who laughed even when life was hard. Their son had inherited that laugh, joyful and bright. They hadn't been wealthy, but they had been happy. Then came the cancer. By the time they caught it, it was already stage 4. Lillian was gone 9 months later. Henry had quit his job to care for her. Afterward, everything unraveled. Bills piled up, savings vanished, the house was sold. They moved to smaller and smaller spaces until there was nothing left but the truck. Still, he tried to protect Noah. He turned the back seat into a spaceship, canned soup into grand adventures, a parking lot into their backyard. Every morning, Henry would see Noah off to school, clean-shaven, shirt tucked in. "Why do you still bother shaving?" a shelter worker once asked him. Henry had smiled. "Because my son needs to believe things will get better, and I need to look like I believe it too." He picked up odd jobs, hauling furniture, patching gutters, sweeping construction sites. It wasn't enough, but it kept them together. Until last fall, when a social worker intervened, said it wasn't safe, said Noah needed stability. Henry hadn't fought it. He knew they were right. Through tears, he signed the papers, hugged his son, and promised, "Just for a little while, I'll come back for you." Since then, every day had been a battle. Sending out resumes, standing in line at job fairs, taking notes at free seminars, studying codes at the library, building a plan, slowly, quietly. Tonight, that plan seemed farther away than ever. Sitting in the freezing truck, Henry rubbed his hands for warmth. He thought about Claire, the woman at the bus stop, how cold she had looked, how surprised she had been when he offered the jacket. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe because she reminded him of Lillian. Maybe because he needed to feel like he could still do something good, like he was still the kind of man who gave more than he took. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Henry pulled a blanket over himself, leaned against the cold window, and closed his eyes. He didn't have much left, but he still had himself. And for tonight, that had to be enough. Claire Langston sat in the warmth of her penthouse apartment, still wrapped in the oversized olive jacket that smelled faintly of soap and distant memories. The folded piece of paper she found in its pocket lay on her lap. A child's drawing, vibrant in its simplicity. 2 stick figures, a heart between them, and the words, "I love you, Daddy," scrawled underneath. She traced the crooked lines with her fingers, a lump forming in her throat. She couldn't shake the image of Henry standing in the snow, shivering in only a thin shirt, his tired smile, the weary kindness in his eyes. He had nothing, and yet he had given without hesitation. It wasn't just the jacket. It was the way he had looked at her, like she mattered, without knowing who she was. Claire knew she couldn't let it go. She needed to find him. The next morning, Claire sat behind her sleek glass desk at Infinity Group, the city skyline sprawling behind her through floor-to-ceiling windows. She picked up the small silver bell sitting on her desk and gave it a soft ring. Within moments, her assistant, Rachel, entered the room. "Yes, Miss Langston?" Rachel asked. "I need your help finding someone," Claire said, her voice calm but firm. Rachel blinked in surprise but nodded. "Of course. Who?" Claire hesitated, the memory of the night before flashing vividly in her mind. "His name is Henry. I don't know his last name. He was at the bus stop on 56th and Edison around 8:30 p.m. last night. He gave me his jacket." Rachel's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. "I'll see what I can do. And, Rachel," Claire added, her tone sharpening slightly, "this stays between us." Rachel gave a small smile. "Understood." Within hours, Rachel had mobilized the resources of Infinity Group's discreet and efficient networks. They requested footage from nearby street cameras, scoured bus route data, and cross-referenced potential passengers with employment databases. Days passed. Claire continued her work, but her mind often drifted back to the jacket tucked safely in her closet, and to the man who had given it away so easily. Finally, Rachel returned with a thin folder. "His name is Henry Miles," Rachel said, placing the folder on Claire's desk. "Former construction engineer. No recent work history. No permanent address." Claire opened the folder. There were grainy security images of a hunched figure in a thin shirt, a frozen LinkedIn profile stuck in time, a scan of an expired construction license. No arrests, no scandals, just emptiness. A life quietly erased. Claire's chest tightened. "Where is he now?" she asked. "One of our people spotted him near the southern Bronx," Rachel said. "There's an old pickup truck behind a warehouse. He seems to be living there." Claire closed the folder. The room felt too bright, too clean. She stood up. "I want to go there." Rachel shifted uneasily. "Are you sure, Miss Langston? We could arrange for someone to bring him here." "No." Claire shook her head firmly. "This isn't a meeting. It's personal." Rachel nodded after a moment. "I'll arrange a car." An hour later, Claire sat in the back seat of a black sedan as it wound its way through parts of the city far from polished conference rooms and marble lobbies. Graffiti-covered walls, shuttered storefronts, and hunched figures braving the cold blurred past the windows. The car finally pulled up in front of a dilapidated warehouse. Snow piled around rusted fences and cracked pavement. Tucked into the shadow of the building sat a battered old Chevrolet truck, barely visible under a thick layer of snow. Claire stepped out of the car. The cold slapped her immediately, sharp and punishing. Her heels crunched over the icy gravel as she walked toward the truck. Through the fogged-up windshield, she could barely make out a figure inside, curled into the front seat. As she approached, the door creaked open. Henry stumbled out, blinking against the sudden daylight. His clothes were rumpled, his boots dusted with snow. He looked thinner than she remembered. At first, confusion crossed his face, then recognition. His expression shifted, embarrassment, caution, then something heavier, shame. "Claire," he rasped, voice rough from sleep and disbelief. She offered a small, uncertain smile. "Hi, Henry." He glanced down at himself, the wrinkled shirt, the worn jeans, the ancient truck behind him. "What are you doing here?" he asked, arms folding defensively across his chest. "I came to find you," Claire said simply. Henry's brow furrowed. "Why?" Claire hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Because I couldn't forget what you did. Because I needed to find the kind of person who would give his last possession to a stranger without expecting anything in return. Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did, she finally said, about the kind of person who gives away the only jacket he owns. Henry gave a bitter chuckle, looking away. You shouldn't have bothered. A thank you card would have been enough. It's not about gratitude, Claire said quietly. It's about not letting something good disappear without being seen. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the snow swirling around them. Two people from two completely different worlds, brought together by an act so small, yet so powerful. Henry finally exhaled, a puff of mist escaping his lips. You really came all the way out here? For that? Claire nodded. Yes, and maybe for something more. Henry said nothing. His eyes were wary, but beneath the caution, something flickered. Something fragile, like a hope he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Claire smiled gently, stepping closer. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Henry sat in the passenger seat of Claire's sleek black sedan, his hands twisting nervously in his lap as the city blurred by outside the window. He hadn't wanted to get in the car. Every instinct told him not to trust kindness that came wrapped in designer coats and luxury vehicles. But something in Claire's voice, steady, warm, stubborn, had pulled him along. They didn't speak much during the drive. Henry stole glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She was focused on the road ahead, her expression unreadable. The car turned into the underground parking garage of a towering glass building, Infinity Group. Henry's stomach twisted into knots. Inside the lobby, marble floors stretched underfoot, and steel and glass gleamed everywhere he looked. Men and women in tailored suits moved with purpose, their conversations low and clipped. Henry hunched his shoulders, painfully aware of every wrinkle in his worn shirt, every scuff on his old boots. This way, Claire said gently, leading him toward a private elevator. The ride up was silent. When the doors opened, they stepped into a quiet hallway lined with large glass conference rooms. Claire guided him into a smaller room at the end and closed the door behind them. Sit, she said, motioning to a chair across from a polished table. Henry hesitated, then sat stiffly. What's this about? He asked, his voice rough. Claire took a seat across from him, placing a slim folder on the table between them. It's not about the jacket, she said. I told you that. Henry gave a short laugh, humorless and hollow. What is it about then? Pity? No, Claire said, her tone firm. It's about opportunity, for both of us. Henry stared at the folder but didn't touch it. I created a role, Claire continued, one I think only you can fill. Henry snorted softly. Lady, I'm not exactly CEO material. I barely have a roof over my head. I'm not looking for another executive, Claire said. I'm looking for someone who understands people, who knows what it's like to be invisible, to be overlooked, to keep giving even when you have nothing left. Henry shook his head. I'm not qualified for anything in this place. Claire leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. You were an engineer. You built schools, hospitals, homes. You know how to build things that matter. That's what I need. Henry's throat tightened. He looked down at his calloused hands. You don't need degrees or connections to teach people compassion, Claire said. You just need to be who you are. He shook his head again, more out of fear than refusal. I haven't built anything in years. I sleep in a truck. And you gave away the only thing keeping you warm to a stranger, Claire said softly. That tells me more about who you are than any resume ever could." Henry rubbed his face, trying to process everything. It felt like a trick. It felt too good to be true. "What exactly would I do?" he asked finally. Claire slid the folder closer to him. "Advisor on cultural and human values. You'd work with teams, help shape programs, remind us why we do what we do. Not with charts or graphs, with heart." Henry let out a shaky breath. "I don't know." "You don't have to decide right now," Claire said, standing up. "Take the time you need." She handed him a business card. "If you want to talk, call me." Henry took the card, staring at it like it might disappear. Claire smiled, a small, genuine smile. "You're needed more than you realize, Henry." Without waiting for him to respond, she turned and left the room, leaving him sitting there, overwhelmed and silent. Henry stayed in the conference room long after she had gone, the folder untouched before him. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling window at the bustling city far below, feeling smaller than he ever had. Part of him wanted to crumple up the card, toss it in the nearest trash can, and run. Back to the cold safety of his truck, back to the familiar ache of disappointment. But another part of him, a small, stubborn flicker, wanted to believe, wanted to hope. The choice felt impossibly heavy. Hours later, Henry sat again behind the wheel of his old truck, the folder resting on the passenger seat beside him. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't dare. The city lights flickered in the falling snow, and Henry watched them through the cracked windshield, lost in thought. He thought of Noah. He thought of the promises he made. Maybe this was the beginning of something he had been waiting for. Or maybe it would all fall apart. Still, against every instinct screaming at him to stay safe, stay hidden, Henry found himself reaching for the folder. Maybe tomorrow he would open it. Maybe tomorrow he would say yes. The first day Henry returned to Infinity Group, he wasn't sure which weighed heavier on him, the thin, borrowed dress shirt he wore or the thick cloud of doubt hanging over his head. He walked through the gleaming lobby under the fluorescent lights, feeling completely out of place. Claire met him at the elevator, smiling with a quiet reassurance that settled some of the storm inside him. "You're not here to impress anyone," she said as they rode up. "You're here to be yourself." Henry wasn't sure he believed that, but he followed her anyway. There was no grand introduction, no fanfare. Claire simply brought him into a small, glass-walled room on the 5th floor, where a handful of department heads sat in stiff chairs, waiting with polite but skeptical expressions. "This is Henry Miles," Claire said simply. "He's here to help us build something more meaningful than profits." Then she left him alone with them. The silence stretched painfully as Henry shifted on his feet, aware of every crease in his borrowed pants, every scuff on his shoes. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'm not here to lecture you," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "I'm not a CEO or a motivational speaker. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be invisible." He told them pieces of his story, not the dramatic parts, but the simple truths. Sleeping in a freezing truck, patching roofs for cash, walking into job fairs in the same old shoes, pretending everything was fine for his son's sake. No pity, no dramatics, just honesty. At first, the department heads listened with polite detachment, but slowly something shifted. Their postures relaxed. Their eyes stopped darting to their phones. By the end of the hour, they were leaning forward, listening. Henry hadn't changed the world that day, but he had started something. In the days that followed, Henry wandered the halls of Infinity Group without a title, without a formal schedule. He talked to people, the receptionists, the custodians, the junior developers. He asked questions no one else bothered to ask. How's your mom doing? Did you ever finish that novel you were writing? When's the last time you took a day off? He listened, really listened. People started seeking him out, first shyly, then more openly. They came to him with worries they couldn't bring to their managers, stress, burnout, feeling unseen. Henry didn't fix their problems. He didn't hand out corporate solutions. He just listened, offering simple, grounding words. One afternoon, a young programmer named Luis stayed behind after a team meeting. I think I'm broken, Luis said quietly, his eyes red-rimmed. Henry shook his head. You're not broken, son. You're tired. Tired isn't broken. It just means you cared too long without anyone caring back. Luis stared at him, stunned. Then he smiled, small, genuine, relieved. The phrase caught on like wildfire. Before Henry even realized it, someone had printed it on posters. It appeared on office doors, coffee mugs, and emails. Tired isn't broken. Even Claire noticed the change. She watched from her office as the atmosphere in Infinity Group slowly transformed. The break room, once a sterile place of quick coffee and silent lunches, buzzed with laughter. Meetings ended with people checking in on each other. Emails grew a little warmer. Productivity didn't drop. It soared. Not because Henry handed out new strategies or clever initiatives, but because people started to feel human again. Meanwhile, outside the office, Henry's life was changing too. With Claire's help and a modest housing stipend from Infinity Group, he put a down payment on a small one-bedroom house in Brooklyn. It wasn't much, a creaky porch, peel and paint, but it was his. Real walls, a real address, a front door that locked, a place to come home to. Noah moved in with him shortly after. Now, a freshman at a nearby college, Noah brought an energy Henry had missed so badly. They ate cheap spaghetti for their first dinner in the new place, sitting on mismatched chairs around a wobbly table. Henry could barely swallow around the lump in his throat. You kept your promise, Noah said quietly, pushing his empty plate away. You came back for me. Henry didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes burned too hot, his throat too tight. But Noah saw it anyway. They didn't need words. They had come home. At Infinity Group, Henry settled into his own small office on the 5th floor. A cozy space with second-hand furniture, a battered coffee maker that always smelled like burnt hope, and a shelf lined with donated plants. People dropped in at all hours. Sometimes just to sit, sometimes to talk. He didn't have a nameplate. He didn't need one. People knew where to find him. One afternoon, Claire visited. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him refill the coffee machine. You've changed this place more than any strategy ever could, she said. Henry chuckled. I didn't do much, just gave folks permission to breathe. Claire smiled. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. They fell into easy conversation, the way they had started to do more often. Lunches in the break room turned into walks around the block. Walks turned into weekend coffee runs. Coffee runs turned into long conversations about everything and nothing. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It just happened. Two people who had spent years building walls around themselves, quietly lowering them, brick by brick. Henry didn't dare call it anything yet, but he felt it growing, a warmth he thought he'd forgotten how to feel. For the first time in years, Henry Miles belonged somewhere, and for the first time in a long, long time, he believed he deserved it. The Infinity Group's atrium had never looked like this before. Gone were the towering banners bragging about quarterly profits and flashy product launches. In their place hung soft white drapes, strings of warm fairy lights, and a massive handcrafted sign that read, in elegant lettering, "A Day of Kindness." Employees crowded shoulder to shoulder, dressed not in power suits, but in their best casual clothes, an energy of quiet excitement thrumming through the air. At the front of the room, a simple wooden podium stood beneath a spotlight. Claire Langston stepped forward, her hair loose around her shoulders, a small, sincere smile playing on her lips. She scanned the faces in front of her. She didn't see numbers. She didn't see shareholders. She saw people. Individuals who had been shaped in ways large and small by one man's simple act. "This day," Claire began, her voice clear and steady, "is not about metrics. It's not about profits or projections. It's about moments." The room hushed. Even the hum of distant conversations faded into silence. "A year ago, I stood at a bus stop in the freezing cold, alone, exhausted, more lost than I even realized. And then, a man I had never met did something no one else that night thought to do." She paused, her throat tightening. "He gave me his jacket." A ripple moved through the crowd, soft and knowing. Claire's smile deepened, touched with emotion. She gestured to the side of the stage where a cloth-covered easel stood. She stepped over, grasped the edge of the cloth, and pulled it away. Underneath the glass, displayed with simple reverence, was the very same olive-green jacket. The fabric was faded, the elbows frayed, the seams stretched, but it was whole, real, beautiful in its worn imperfection. Beneath it, a bronze plaque read, "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life." Claire turned back to the audience. Her voice trembled slightly but grew stronger with each word. "That night didn't just change my evening. It changed the entire direction of my life. And today we honor not just a moment, but the man who made it possible." She looked toward the crowd. "Henry, would you please come up here?" For a moment, it seemed as though no one moved. Then slowly, Henry Miles rose from his seat near the back, adjusting the simple, well-pressed suit he wore. It wasn't designer. It didn't need to be. Applause began softly, then grew and swelled as he made his way down the aisle, cheeks flushing under the attention. He kept his head low, one hand absently brushing against the jacket pocket where he kept something small, something important. Henry climbed the few steps to the stage, standing awkwardly beside Claire. She smiled at him, warm and proud. Without fanfare, she reached into her own pocket and pulled out a white envelope, pressing it into his hand. "This is yours," she said. Henry opened it carefully. Inside was a deed. An official document, stamped and sealed, transferring full ownership of his new house in Brooklyn to his name. There was a collective murmur of joy from the crowd. Claire leaned in, her voice soft but audible. No more nights in trucks. The applause thundered again, but Henry wasn't finished. He stepped forward slowly, clearing his throat, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. "Actually," he said, voice cracking with emotion, "I have something too." From the inside pocket of his jacket, he drew out a small, battered box. It wasn't fancy, no velvet, no gold, but it was clean and cared for. He turned to Claire, his heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear himself think. "You said this jacket changed your life," he said, holding the box tightly. "But you changed mine. You gave me back my name, my son, a home, hope." He opened the box. Inside, nestled against faded silk, was a simple silver ring, unadorned, unpretentious, but shining with quiet meaning. Henry swallowed hard. "I kept this for a long time," he said, voice trembling. Because if there was ever someone more important than that jacket, it was you." The room had gone utterly silent, the kind of silence that falls right before the world shifts. Henry's knees nearly buckled. "Claire Langston," he said, voice breaking, "will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, Claire just stared at him wide-eyed. Then the moment cracked open. She laughed, a soft, beautiful sound full of wonder and tears, and nodded fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." The room erupted into cheers. People clapped and whistled, some wiping their eyes. Claire threw her arms around Henry, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just the two of them, standing under soft lights, surrounded by the beating heart of the company they had helped heal together. A month later, they were married. It wasn't a grand wedding in a glittering ballroom. It wasn't a five-star event with celebrity guests. It was better. They stood together in the warm, brick-walled community center Claire had founded, Thomas's Place, named after the man who once saved her. The decorations were simple: paper flowers made by the kids, mismatched chairs, a cake baked by one of the interns from Infinity Group's mentorship program. Claire wore a simple white dress, her hair loose and unstyled. Henry wore the same suit he had on the day of the Day of Kindness ceremony. Noah stood proudly at Henry's side as best man. Their vows were short, heartfelt, and spoken through tears. "When you gave me your jacket," Claire said, her hands trembling in Henry's, "you didn't just save me from the cold. You saved my heart." Henry couldn't speak. He could only nod, the emotion stealing his voice. They kissed to cheers and laughter, and the reception spilled into the small courtyard outside, where children ran barefoot and fairy lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Someone snapped a photo: Henry and Claire, standing beneath the hand-painted sign for Thomas's Place, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her, and the old olive-green jacket proudly displayed on a nearby easel. The image made its way online. It spread like wildfire, shared, reposted, discussed. Not because of fame, not because of wealth, because it showed what truly mattered: a small act of kindness, a moment of warmth in a cold world, and the reminder that sometimes giving everything you have doesn't leave you empty. It makes you whole. The first day of their new life dawned quietly. Henry woke up to the soft, steady breathing of Claire beside him, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of their small Brooklyn home. For a moment, he simply lay there, listening, letting the peace settle deep into his bones. He had almost forgotten what mornings could feel like without fear. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee. Claire hummed a low tune under her breath as she poured 2 cups, her hair still tousled from sleep. Henry watched her for a moment from the staircase, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This wasn't the life he had once imagined. It was better. They shared breakfast at their small kitchen table, the windows open to let in the crisp air. Noah joined them later, his backpack slung lazily over one shoulder, a bright grin on his face. "Big day?" Henry asked, handing him a plate of toast. Noah nodded. "First interview for the summer internship. Thanks for pressing the shirt, Dad." Henry chuckled. Just returning the favor. After Noah left, Claire pulled a crumpled old drawing from a drawer, the one she had found inside Henry's jacket that night at the bus stop. She smoothed it carefully, running her fingers over the faded lines. "I think we should frame it," she said. Henry nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "Yeah, we should." They spent the afternoon hanging it in the living room, above the couch that didn't quite match the rest of the furniture. It didn't matter. It was home. At Infinity Group, life had changed too. Henry's influence had taken root and blossomed into something bigger than either of them had anticipated. The company no longer treated kindness like an optional initiative. It was woven into its foundation. Departments held regular breathing space days where productivity took a back seat to well-being. Anonymous appreciation boards sprung up on every floor. New hires were not only trained in company protocols, but also taught about empathy and human connection. The once cold and glossy halls now buzzed with laughter, soft conversations, and open doors. Henry's small office remained the heart of it all. It wasn't grand, it wasn't flashy, but it was full of people, of stories, of quiet hope. Claire, too, had changed. Her leadership style shifted. Meetings started with a check-in about people, not numbers. Deadlines still mattered, but they no longer defined the worth of the people meeting them. She often found herself looking at Henry across a crowded room, her heart catching at the quiet steadiness of him. He was her compass, her reminder. They built their days around small rituals, morning coffees, evening walks through the neighborhood, Sunday visits to Thomas's place where Claire still volunteered. Henry sometimes hosted informal talks there, sharing stories with kids who had seen too much, teaching them that their worth wasn't measured by where they slept or what they wore. One chilly evening, as they sat on their front steps wrapped in an old blanket, Claire turned to Henry. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Miss what?" "The life you had before." Henry thought for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "Not the work, not the house. Maybe the man I used to be, before I forgot how important it is to simply care." Claire leaned her head against his shoulder. "You never forgot," she murmured. "You just needed someone to remind you." They sat there in comfortable silence, the city humming softly around them, the stars peeking through the darkening sky. Sometimes the past still whispered to Henry, the nights in the truck, the long walks to nowhere, the empty answers at job fairs. But now those memories didn't carry shame. They carried pride. He had survived. He had built something new, something better. At Infinity Group's annual retreat months later, Claire stood before the employees once more. This time she didn't talk about profits or growth charts. She spoke about kindness, about resilience, about how small acts can echo further than we ever realize. Behind her on the stage, framed under soft lights, was the olive green jacket, now a permanent symbol of the company's new heart. As Claire finished speaking, Henry joined her on stage, taking her hand. They didn't need speeches or applause. Their lives said everything. Henry Miles, once a man lost to the cold streets of New York, now stood at the center of a thriving community he had helped heal. Not with money, not with status, with kindness, with presence, with heart. And Claire Langston, once a woman locked behind glass walls of success, now lived with an open heart, a home full of love, and a future built on the strongest foundation there is. Together, they had rewritten their stories, not with grand gestures, but with one simple act of kindness that changed everything. And somewhere, perhaps, someone else stood at a bus stop, shivering in the cold, waiting not just for a bus, but for a sign that kindness still mattered. Henry and Claire's story would live on, in every smile shared between strangers, every hand extended without expectation, every small choice to care. Because kindness, they had learned, doesn't just change moments, it changes lives. Sometimes one small act of kindness can change a life forever. If this story touched your heart, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story